Hello my dear friends, welcome to Hauntra. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon so that you don't miss any exciting coming up videos. Lena had always been drawn to art with dark histories, pieces that held stories in their colors and strokes. When she learned about an auction of rare antiques, she knew she had to attend. The auction hall was filled with the scent of old wood and dust, the air thick with anticipation. It was a collection of paintings, sculptures, and furniture that spanned centuries. As she roamed the room, her eyes settled on one painting. It depicted a woman dressed in an elaborate black gown, standing in a Gothic, candle-lit room. Her face was pale, her expression solemn, and her eyes seemed to follow Lena's every move. There was an unsettling aura about the painting, a feeling that it was watching her. The room fell silent as the auctioneer announced it. Despite a rising sense of discomfort, Lena felt an irresistible pull toward it. When the bidding started, she hesitated, but quickly raised her paddle. The room's tension was palpable. The final bid was hers, and Lena couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of triumph and unease as the painting was handed over to her. The auctioneer's words echoed in her mind. "Be careful with this one. Some things in this world are better left untouched." At home, Lena placed the painting in her living room, right above the fireplace. The room was dimly lit, the shadows adding an air of mystery. She studied the portrait, feeling its gaze follow her, no matter where she stood. There was something in the woman's eyes, haunting, almost pleading. The longer Lena stared at it, the more she felt the painting was alive, its presence pressing on her chest. That night, as she prepared for bed, she heard the faintest whisper coming from the direction of the portrait. At first, she dismissed it as the wind, but the whisper became more distinct the next night. Lena couldn't explain it. Soft, barely audible words, as if someone was calling her. She approached the painting with a growing sense of dread. "Help me," the voice said again. The air around her grew cold, and the hairs on her neck stood on end. She recoiled, unsure whether it was her imagination or something far darker. Lena turned away quickly, dismissing it as a trick of her mind. But the voice persisted, becoming clearer with each passing night. The whispers seemed to come from within the painting itself. The whispers became louder each night, unsettling Lena further. She began to feel like the woman in the portrait was trying to communicate with her, but no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, the sensation of being watched never left. One evening, she sat on the couch, her eyes fixed on the painting. The voices seemed to come from within her mind now, murmuring urgently. The woman's eyes in the painting appeared to glisten with an emotion Lena couldn't place. "I need you to listen," the voice inside her head said, calm yet firm. Her heart raced. Lena stood up and moved closer to the painting, her breath catching in her throat. The woman's mouth shifted ever so slightly, as if it were moving, trying to speak. Lena leaned in closer, now captivated by the sensation that something was terribly wrong. "Who are you?" Lena whispered aloud. "Why are you here?" For a moment, there was silence, a heavy, oppressive silence that filled the room. Then, in a voice filled with sorrow, the woman's voice echoed in Lena's mind. "I am trapped in this frame, a prisoner of my own sorrow. You are the only one who can help me." Lena stepped back, trembling, her mind racing. Who was this woman? And how could she be trapped in a painting? The following day, Lena couldn't shake the words the woman had spoken to her. She researched the painting, trying to find any information about its origins. After hours of searching, she came across an old newspaper article about a missing woman named Evelyn Armitage, whose last known whereabouts were traced to an abandoned mansion in the countryside. The article described Evelyn as a young woman of noble descent, with dark hair and striking eyes, the same features that matched the woman in the portrait. According to the article, Evelyn had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and rumors of her spirit haunting the mansion had persisted for decades. A chill ran down Lena's spine as she connected the dots. The painting had to be a portrait of Evelyn. But what did it mean that she was trapped in it? Lena felt a deep sense of sympathy for the woman, but also a growing fear. She knew she had to learn more, even if it meant delving deeper into a story far darker than she could have imagined. That night, she returned to the portrait. This time, she didn't wait for the whispers to begin. She spoke first. "What happened to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. For the first time, the voice didn't just echo in her mind. It came from the painting itself. Lena's heart pounded as the voice from the painting filled the room, not in whispers but in clear, unmistakable words. "You must help me break the curse," Evelyn's voice urged. "I am trapped, bound to this frame by a pact made long ago. The only way to set me free is for someone to take my place." Lena's eyes widened in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Take your place," she echoed. "What do you mean?" The woman's voice was filled with sorrow and desperation. "I was once a painter's muse, trapped in the obsession of a mad artist. In his final act, he cursed me to live forever in his painting, my soul imprisoned within the frame. For years, I've been unable to escape, but there's a way. If someone willing replaces me, I will be freed, and they will become the next prisoner." Lena recoiled, horrified by the revelation. She couldn't fathom becoming part of the painting, but Evelyn's voice pleaded with her. "Please, I have suffered for so long. You are the only one who can help me." The room seemed to close in around Lena as the weight of the choice hung heavily in the air. Would she risk her freedom to save the soul of a woman she had never met? Or would she walk away and let the curse continue? Lena spent the following days in turmoil. The idea of taking Evelyn's place felt like a terrible choice, yet the sorrow in the woman's voice haunted her. She couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn's plea. Each time she passed the painting, she felt the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. It wasn't just the words that affected her, but the palpable sense of longing in Evelyn's eyes. As days turned into nights, Lena began to see things differently. The house felt emptier, quieter, like a vacuum had settled in the air around her. She couldn't help but notice that her once vibrant surroundings now felt suffocating and cold. Was this the curse? Was it already starting to claim her? That night, she sat down in front of the painting once more, staring into Evelyn's eyes, now filled with a strange, almost hypnotic pull. "I can't leave you like this," Lena whispered to herself. "But how can I possibly take your place?" As if answering her, the whispers filled the room, not in panic, but in a tone of calm assurance. "You are the one. Only you can release me. You are already here, already connected to this place. Don't fight it." Evelyn's voice was now soothing, almost affectionate. Lena stood, her heart pounding. Was she really considering this? Was she really about to make a pact with something she couldn't even understand? Lena had made up her mind. There was no turning back now. Desperation and curiosity mixed with fear, pushing her toward the painting. As she stared into Evelyn's eyes, the room seemed to warp, and she felt an unfamiliar force pulling her in. The whispers were now louder, more insistent, urging her to move closer, to make the final decision. "Do it." Evelyn's voice echoed from the painting. Lena's fingers trembled as she reached out, touching the cold canvas. The moment her skin made contact, she felt a surge of energy, cold, sharp, and consuming. She staggered back, her vision blurring, her heart racing as she struggled to breathe. The room spun, and for a moment she thought she might collapse, but then everything went still. The whispers faded, and all that was left was silence. Suddenly, Lena's reflection in the painting shifted. The woman in the frame was smiling, a small, subtle smile that filled her with an uneasy sense of relief. Was this it? Had the curse been lifted? But as she turned away, a deep unease settled in her stomach. Something wasn't right. She felt the room grow darker, colder, and she realized with horror that the room itself had become eerily quiet, like a place suspended in time. The next morning, Lena woke with a pounding headache and a sense of dread she couldn't shake. The world outside her window seemed darker than usual, the colors muted and lifeless. She had tried to convince herself that the events of the previous night were just a bad dream. But as she stood in front of the mirror, she realized something was wrong. Her reflection wasn't quite right. The room seemed smaller, more suffocating, and Lena couldn't explain it, but she felt a deep, overwhelming sense of displacement. Her own face, staring back at her from the mirror, appeared pale and drained of color. Her eyes were hollow, and her once vibrant expression now seemed void of emotion. It was as if she wasn't really there anymore. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She quickly turned away, trying to shake off the feeling. But as she walked into the living room, her heart skipped a beat. The painting, Evelyn's painting, was no longer hanging above the fireplace. Instead, it was leaning against the wall, positioned directly in front of her. The woman's eyes were no longer pleading. They were glaring, furious, as if accusing her. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Had she made a mistake? As the days passed, Lena's transformation grew more evident. It wasn't just her appearance that had changed, but the entire atmosphere around her seemed different. The house no longer felt like her home. The walls seemed to close in, and the air felt thick with something oppressive. The whispers were no longer coming from the painting. Now they were coming from every corner of the house, from the very walls themselves. The voice of Evelyn had changed, too. It was no longer pleading, but mocking, sinister. "You think you've helped me?" Evelyn's voice echoed through the house, sharper than ever. "You're just as trapped as I was. You can't escape now." Lena's hands trembled as she tried to ignore the voice, but every corner of the house seemed to be watching her. It was as if the entire house had become a living entity, and she was its prisoner. The transformation that had started in her reflection was spreading. Her movements were slower, her thoughts clouded. The energy around her felt heavy, like she was suffocating. And then one night, she realized that she could hear footsteps behind her, footsteps that weren't her own. The realization hit Lena like a bolt of lightning. She wasn't the one who had helped Evelyn. She had only sealed her own fate. The more she fought the transformation, the more it consumed her. Her reflection grew more and more distant, like a ghostly version of herself, while Evelyn's presence in the painting seemed to grow stronger. Every day the painting seemed to take on more life, more movement, and now Lena could see Evelyn clearly. Standing at the edge of the frame, her hand reaching out as though trying to pull herself free. But each time Lena tried to get close, the woman's expression grew more menacing, and the house seemed to vibrate with an unholy energy. Panic began to set in as Lena realized that she was no longer in control of her own body. It was as if something else was guiding her actions, pulling her deeper into the painting's grasp. and as the room around her continued to darken, Lena felt herself being pulled toward the frame, drawn into the painting, her body becoming weightless and cold. The more she struggled, the tighter the grip of the curse grew. Lena's body grew numb as the transformation escalated. Her fingers tingled, unable to move on their own, as though controlled by something outside of herself. Her mind screamed for release, but her voice wouldn't come. She was trapped, suffocating in a nightmare she had willingly entered. As she was pulled closer to the painting, she could feel the coldness of the canvas seeping into her skin. The whispers had become deafening, each word carrying the weight of 1,000 tormented souls. "You're mine now," Evelyn's voice whispered cruelly, mocking Lena's desperate attempts to break free. Lena's reflection in the painting was no longer her own. It had merged with Evelyn's image. She saw herself trapped in the painting, her face distorted into an expression of terror, as though she was forever frozen in that moment. Panic surged through her veins. How had she allowed herself to be so blind? How had she let the painting's call overcome her judgment? She struggled to free herself from the invisible force that bound her, but it was futile. Her physical body was no longer hers to control. It was as if her very soul had been tethered to the cursed painting. The room around her spun faster and faster, her consciousness fraying at the edges. Lena's last shred of control began to slip away. She watched as her reflection, now fully absorbed into the canvas, began to smile. But it wasn't her smile. It was a dark, twisted grin that belonged to Evelyn, a grin that was full of malice and triumph. The room around her grew darker as the hours passed, the whispers never ceasing. The only light now came from the painting itself, casting an eerie glow over the space. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she realized that she could no longer tell where her body ended and where the painting began. It was as if the two were one. As Lena's mind spiraled, she thought back to the very first time she had set eyes on that painting. She had been drawn to it, unaware of the trap it held. She had become obsessed with it, perhaps even enamored by its haunting beauty. Now she cursed herself for ever allowing it into her life. She could feel her energy slipping away, her essence being consumed by the painting's darkness. She wasn't just trapped physically, her very soul was being erased, absorbed into the cursed frame. Time had ceased to exist. Lena's mind was no longer anchored to reality. She was neither in the world of the living nor the painting. It was as though she was suspended between two dimensions, her consciousness fading in and out. She saw visions of herself, trapped in different versions of the painting, each one more distorted and horrifying than the last. In one, she was surrounded by darkness, her face warped in agony. In another, her eyes were wide with terror, her hands reaching out as if begging for help that would never come. She could hear her own voice, her real voice, echoing through the corridors of her mind, but it was drowned out by the sinister, mocking laughter of Evelyn. "You were never meant to escape," Evelyn's voice taunted. "You belong to me now." The pressure on Lena's chest grew unbearable as her breath became labored. She could no longer fight it. The pull of the painting was too strong. She had become nothing more than a specter, a shadow of her former self. The hours stretched on, and with each passing minute, her presence in the real world faded more. Lena had no memory of how much time had passed since she first touched the painting. She had lost track of her sense of self. All that remained was the overwhelming feeling of being drawn deeper into the painting. She no longer saw the world beyond the frame. All she could see was Evelyn's twisted grin, welcoming her into eternal darkness. The voices had stopped, but their absence left an eerie silence that only heightened her dread. Lena's body felt like it no longer belonged to her. She was fading away, her soul becoming part of the very fabric of the cursed art. And yet, the embrace of the painting felt oddly familiar, comforting even. It was as if this was her true home, her final resting place. She closed her eyes, giving in to the inevitable. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw Evelyn's face, smiling at her once more. This time, it wasn't malicious, it was welcoming. "Welcome to your new life," Evelyn whispered softly. Lena's final breath left her lips, and as her vision blurred, she felt herself cross the threshold into the painting, becoming one with the cursed art forever. The house stood still, eerily quiet. The once constant whispers had faded into nothingness. The world outside carried on, unaware of the torment inside. But those who stepped into the house, drawn by an inexplicable force, never left the same. The painting of Evelyn remained, but the faces inside it, Lena's and Evelyn's, were now indistinguishable. They had become one, forever trapped within the canvas. No longer able to call out for help, no longer able to escape. The house was their prison. And as each new visitor arrived, the cycle would begin again. The painting would call, and one would inevitably answer, unaware of the horrors that awaited. Months passed, but the cursed house remained as silent as ever. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The townsfolk had long forgotten the house, dismissing it as just another abandoned place, lost to time. But those who had ventured too close spoke of strange occurrences, sights and sounds that couldn't be explained. An unnatural chill in the air, whispers carried by the wind, and glimpses of figures watching from behind the windows. People who wandered near the house sometimes claimed to feel a sudden coldness, a presence that seemed to follow them. But when they turned around, there was nothing. The house had become a forgotten memory to all except those it had claimed. It wasn't until a young couple, curious about the strange stories they'd heard, decided to visit the house that the cycle began anew. As they stepped over the threshold, the door creaked shut behind them, the house seemingly alive and waiting. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been the day Lena had disappeared. Dust-covered furniture, cracked walls, and the ominous painting above the fireplace. The couple felt drawn to it, just as Lena had. But what they didn't know was that the house had already marked them. They were the next victims, already becoming part of the twisted history of the house. The couple stepped inside the house, unknowing of the terrible fate awaiting them. The air was thick with dust and decay, but the house had an almost welcoming aura. It was as though the walls themselves were eager for them to enter. The painting of Evelyn and Lena, now permanently part of the house's history, loomed above the fireplace, dark and foreboding. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The couple wandered through the rooms, taking in the dilapidated decor and sharing their thoughts aloud. But there was a palpable tension in the air, a quiet unease they couldn't quite place. It was as if something was watching them, waiting. The woman, Emma, was drawn to the painting, her curiosity piqued by the strange expression on the woman's face. She couldn't resist moving closer. "This one looks different," she remarked. The man, Michael, joined her, his eyes studying the painting as well. It was then that the whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost inaudible, but soon the whispers grew louder, clearer, and suddenly Emma's own voice echoed through the room. No, not like this. It was her voice, yet she hadn't spoken. Terrified, she spun around, looking for the source, but there was nothing. The house had begun to claim them. The longer they stayed in the house, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. The house was no longer just a place. It felt alive, pulsating with an energy that made the air feel thick and heavy. The walls creaked and groaned as if they were shifting, rearranging, closing in on them. The couple's unease grew as they realized they could no longer leave. The door that had once been open to them was now sealed shut, as if the house itself had locked them in. As they desperately searched for another way out, they noticed the floorboards creaking beneath their feet, as if someone or something was moving within the house. But when they turned to look, no one was there. The whispers grew louder and clearer, their words no longer just disembodied voices, but almost like commands. "Come closer," the voices beckoned. "It's time." The couple, paralyzed with fear, found themselves inexplicably drawn to the painting once again. Emma could no longer tear her eyes away from it, as if the painting was now pulling at her very soul. The figure of Evelyn in the painting had changed. Her eyes were no longer filled with rage, but with an empty hunger. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for a long time. As the hours passed, the house began to distort. Time no longer felt real. It seemed like days had passed in what felt like mere moments, and the couple felt themselves slowly losing grip on reality. Every corner of the house now seemed to whisper their names, echoing their every move, trapping them in a labyrinth with no escape. The air grew colder with every step, and the oppressive atmosphere grew heavier. They stumbled through the dark hallways, their minds unraveling, unsure whether they were still in the house or trapped in some otherworldly dimension. Emma's thoughts became a swirl of panic as she realized that she was no longer in control of her body. Her limbs moved without her command, her feet taking her back to the painting. Michael, equally frightened, reached out to stop her, but something invisible forced him back. The painting began to pulse with unnatural energy. The figures of Lena and Evelyn seemed to come to life, their eyes now watching the couple with a terrifying intensity. Evelyn's voice filled the room, sharp and commanding. "You're mine now," she whispered, "just like the others." Emma screamed, her body now moving toward the painting against her will, while Michael tried to grab her, but his own limbs were held in place by an unseen force. The house had claimed them, just as it had claimed Lena before them. The house stood silent once more, its walls still vibrating with an unspoken, haunting presence. Emma and Michael had vanished, their bodies absorbed into the painting just like Lena's had been before them. The cycle had begun again. The house had claimed new souls, and with them it grew stronger. The town around it remained blissfully unaware of the horrors trapped within those walls. The whispers that had once belonged to Lena and Evelyn now carried on the wind, reaching out to others who might step too close to the house. The painting remained above the fireplace, its figures, Lena, Evelyn, Emma, and Michael, locked in a frozen tableau of eternal torment. The faces were now indistinguishable, their expressions forever trapped in a moment of terror. As new victims arrived, the house would claim them, and the cycle would continue, endlessly. No one could escape, not even those who had once been consumed by the curse. And as time went on, the house would become a darker, more dangerous place, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to wander too close. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more new videos.